Hello. First of all, thank you for probably the best introduction I've ever had. That was lovely. So, this is an amazing time to be a designer and a programmer. I just feel like we're playing with such primal forces, such new ways of doing things. And I kind of run the risk of being a bit of the graybeard in the audience, but what I was doing in the 80s doesn't hold a candle to what we can do now. There are so many interesting things. And part of the reason why it's so exciting is that it's so confusing. What we're playing with, what we're trying to do, just takes a little bit to get your head wrapped around. So, let me just give you two examples of kind of the yin and the yang of what's possible today. So, I'm a big Amazon Kindle user, I think many of you may be, and I'm really excited about how I've been able to use it for the last couple of years. So I get a book and I can read it on my tablet, my laptop, and my phone, and because of this synchronization that they do, wherever I am in any particular chapter, I can move from one device to the next, and that's kind of cool. And now just recently, I did something that was somewhat outside of character for me. I actually bought a bestseller. And when I bought that bestseller, it was like, hey, for an extra $4, you can have the audiobook. It's like, okay, $4, I'd give it a try. So then I got a set of Bluetooth headset, and I could go for a run, and I could listen to the book. And what was amazing to me, and I didn't even do anything, it's synchronized as well to the cloud. And so that after my run, I could then pick up my tablet, and I'd continue right where I left off when I was listening. And this kind of just blew me away because it kind of made sense. But then I just started listening to that book all the time. I'd be driving in the car, I was chopping carrots. I was just like listening. Half of this book was on listening, and I read the book so much faster. And what I love about this type of design is this invisible design. There was no UI. It just worked in this way that I didn't have to do anything. And that, to me, is really a very motivational type of product that kind of indicates the way we should be thinking about future smart devices. Now, let's tell the other side of the story. The other side of the story is these Bluetooth headsets. I'm sure we've all played with them. We've had them for 20 years. But let me give you a little background. First of all, I play with my phone a lot. I install a lot of goofy apps in it, and my wife really gets irritated with me because usually throughout the night, my phone is beeping and booping, and she just had enough. Said, you've just got to stop this phone making so much noise. So for a week, I was fiddling around, and I never quite got it. And there was always one more thing, and she was understandably getting kind of frustrated with me. So I finally got it calmed down. So then one night, I had set my phone aside. It was going to be quiet. And I had to get up in the middle of the night. And I found this Bluetooth headset on the countertop of the kitchen. And I was like, oh, it's on. I've got to turn it off. I've got to make sure that I don't run out of battery. And you know how these phones have these headsets have this little button here on the side, that little tiny thing that's indistinguishable from anything else, this kind of magic button that you push 14 different ways to do different functions. So it's like, oh, I remember now, you press and hold to turn on, then you press and hold to turn off. So I press and hold to turn off, and this is these new high technology ones that speak to you. And it goes, power on! And I'm like, oh, that's kind of clever. It automatically turned off. I should have just left it there. Oh my God, it's on. What's this mean? Because, wait a second, I'm 40 feet away from my bedroom. There's no way. Connecting! I'm like, shit. Because now I knew that my phone was beeping and booping, and my wife was going to be like, not another thing. And I'm like, I just really hate technology at that point. So I'm like, okay, so I press and hold again to turn it off. Because, of course, that's got to be the flip side, because that will save me. Dialing! Who are you dialing? I'm like, what is going on? And it's just like, and all of a sudden I'm like, who are you dialing? At 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, who was the last person? Ring! The last person I called was my wife, who had the phone right next to her bed. So if anyone says there are not serious consequences to bad design, I'm the poster child to tell you this. And so what's so frustrating to me is that we have these kinds of two different approaches to this new technology, this awesome thing that just works, and it's almost understated. You hardly even know it's there. And this thing that's been around for 20 years and is just irritating beyond belief. It's one of the reasons why I get so frustrated with Bluetooth, the old Bluetooth, so much. But so then, as we talk about smart devices and the Internet of Things, what approach are we going to do? Are we going to have magical, lovely devices that just work, or are we going to have a bunch of irritating things? I'm pretty sure you know which one we're going to get first. because there's that pattern. So how do we break this apart? So I have the luxury of having done a lot of design with a lot of different companies. And I've been a little bit more reflective. John kind of encouraged me to have this be a little bit more reflective talk. And I'm really fascinated by this idea of the sociology of design. How do we make products together? How do we think as a group? How do we make innovation happen? Because when we look back in the past, we can kind of see this pattern, and we're always fascinated with what's coming next. But what we end up doing is we tend to look at the past and see the easy things. In fact, you see this in the trade press all the time when they're talking about what is going to be in the future. It's going to be smaller and faster and cheaper. And I would claim 75% of all the articles that you read about the future is about these things. And that's not really making much of a prediction. That's incremental innovation. Actually, in terms of Apple's announcement yesterday, we should probably add thinner to that, because everything Apple does is just a little bit thinner. And that's really innovative. I'm sorry, it's cool, but come on, guys. It's we've heard this record before. So, but the really disruptive things that have happened in the last 20 years don't fit in this kind of Moore's Law pattern. It's been like the World Wide Web or the wireless global data network. Those are really the big transformative things that have really enabled these devices, but they don't kind of fit back into how we see the past. So what we tend to do, it's kind of interesting from a psychological point of view, we look to the past and we see what's easy to extrapolate, and that's what we predict into the future. So we are predicting the future based on the easily profilable things of the past. So what's going to come next? Well, of course, what's going to happen is the iWatch, or whatever the hell it's going to be. That's the obvious extension that everyone's talking about, soon to be followed, of course, by the iRing and the iTiTac. It's just simply this way of just taking things and packaging smaller. Now, there have been some problems with some of the current watches out there, and everyone's like, but Apple's going to get it. They always get it. Everyone else screws it up. So someday, Apple will probably do the iWatch, and it'll be cool. There's nothing wrong with that, but is this the only way we're going to go? I mean, what other directions could we do, and what actually have we been seeing? So what I find interesting is to say, well, wait a second. Let's just think about what's been happening for the last couple years. Have we been seeing a whole bunch of these things? Well, we've seen, like Samsung had its little mistake a couple of weeks ago. But we've been seeing, I think, a different pattern. We're seeing things like the Nest, which when it first came out, by the way, got an awful lot of criticism as being weird, but now it's kind of the darling of the smart device category. And then we see a whole bunch of these new little things. I'm not sure if you guys all have seen all these, but the top one is Twine, a smart sensor. You've got the Vitali Glow Cap. Does anybody know the Vitali Glow Cap? Yeah, no, I think it's a smart pill bottle, and if you don't take your pills, it calls your phone. Like, really simple idea, right? And there's about 1 million smart light bulbs out there. Everyone's doing smart light bulbs. And so this is not what we were expecting. This is kind of going in weird directions. There's no convergence. It's more of a divergence. And then, of course, you throw in smart cities, and all hell breaks loose. You're like, what the hell is going on? This is not a kind of a future that we've envisioned. It's kind of a little chaotic. It's making us more confused. So I love this quote from David Gelernter. It took us more than 20 years, but computing has finally moved from conserving resources ingeniously to squandering them creatively. And I think that's our challenge. We need to start to throw away computation on these devices and think about devices in a different way. So probably the one book I remember as an undergraduate is this one, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. I strongly recommend you don't read it. The Wikipedia page is perfectly adequate. But it basically talks about a way in which science has evolved and how it kind of spirals upward and gets better each time. And it has a really strong analog to how we do design and technology. It's called the Kuhn cycle. And it basically starts with this idea of your clicker not working. There we go. It starts with normal science, and then you drift from, as you have a regular model of how science works. And then what happens is that as you do more measurements, things don't quite right. Your model's drifting. You're not quite sure what's going on. Eventually, you get enough drifting that your model is clearly wrong, and you have a crisis. Eventually, there's a revolution and a paradigm change, and you start all over again. But what's fascinating about this is how that model crisis turns to a revolution, because usually a small percentage of people are the ones that are causing the trouble. I mean, think Galileo. He was a poster child for this kind of process. And what happened was the vast majority of people fight the change. Their basic response is drink less coffee, calm down. It's okay, just keep rowing the boat. And that's why he chose the word revolution, because it is a battle. The vast majority of people don't want change. I think that really applies an awful lot to us. So right now, I would claim that we're at this model crisis. We've got these new devices, and they're not fitting. We're not quite sure where to put them, and people like me are coming along to come up with other alternatives, and everyone's kind of like, just make an iPhone app, would you? Just make an app. So the way this applies to my work, and I've written a book chapter on this in a couple articles called Default Thinking, and it's just this natural human tendency, the implication of the Kuhn cycle in our work. Whenever we see a brand new technology, do we immediately use it for what it should be used for? No. We turn around and we apply it to what we were doing yesterday. The classic example is when TV. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. When TV first came out, they read radio plays in front of the camera. Doesn't that sound exciting? But of course, they figured it out, but they actually thought that was a good idea. And that's just kind of a natural way of doing it. We tend to evaluate tomorrow's technologies by how well they accomplish yesterday's tasks, which seems a little weird, but that's just kind of the human way. It's how we stumble into the future. It's not to be criticized, it's just to be understood. That's just how we think. Like an example, though, of how this applied to me was when I was at Symbian. Yikes. I might have to drive this by hand. There we go. So at Symbian, I was working on the UIQ phone. It was the first kind of touch stylus-based phone that Symbian was producing. And what ended up happening was we were trying to deal with this issue of you were editing a calendar entry, and it was an interrupt-based system. The phone was going to ring, and what were you going to do when the phone rang and you had to be whisked away to answer the call? Well, I strongly felt like you just had to auto-save. But I had to fight the programmers because they were like, no, you need to have a save changes dialog box. Okay, cancel? I'm like, what? And so the model, the paradigm of the desktop document model was so strong, and they assumed it had to be used to a new paradigm of the phone that they were adamant about it, and it was a big argument. Now, in hindsight, it seems quite quaint that they would do that because now we're kind of used to that. But back then, it was a big argument. So perspective is worth 80 IQ points. I love this quote from Alan Kay because it kind of just gives you the idea that you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. You just have to think about the problem properly. And the biggest problem with default thinking is that it's a perspective killer. It locks you into, in fact, I would actually say you lose IQ points if you're constantly thinking in terms of the old model. If there's one thing that my time at Frog Design, I was creative director at Frog Design at San Francisco, and it was that everybody that walked through the door wanted innovation. Everybody wants innovation. The problem was that nobody wants risk. And it's really frustrating because it's like they come in, Prague is not a cheap place. You come in, you go through all these exercises, we come up with all these ideas, and then they end up just kind of dropping most of it on the floor. And it's really frustrating to me because what ended up happening was that people were stuck in this model revolution. There's almost two things that happen. One is the fact that they end up just being afraid. There's a way the world works, and no one wants to stick their neck out because it's taking that little bit of a risk. And that's really kind of frustrating to me. But the other one is the fact that the trade press doesn't really reward you. These are quotes I pulled up. It's kind of fun to be able to go back and Google. Google can let you search within time slices, and I can actually search, back in 2005 for articles. These are quotes that I pulled from trade press when the iPhone was first released. They were not kind, right? And no matter what you think of Apple today, because it's kind of fun to kind of poke fun at Apple today because they seem to be kind of wandering around a little bit, but back in 2005, they were kicking ass. They were pretty amazing. And they took these risks, and they just didn't care. And that's kind of what innovation means, is that if you think you're right, you just have to go for it a little bit, because the world will not support you sometimes. It's a little frustrating. So let's talk about the Internet of Things. Let's talk about the smart fridge, because that's exactly what the Internet of Things is about, right? Not. That's a perfect example, I think, of default thinking. Let's take a tablet and slap it on a refrigerator and call it smart. It's like, guys, please, let's have a little bit more, creativity here. So let's talk about an article that actually was written just 3 months ago. This was not that long ago. This is in Wired magazine. And it was basically called Welcome to the Programmable World, about this wonderful world of smart devices. And this type of article is what I'm talking about. This article does a disservice. It sets us back. Let's just take a look at some of the scenarios that they were proposing. For example, baby's, I'm not sure you can read that, baby's room tries to soothe baby back to sleep. If that doesn't work, it texts you at the neighbor's cocktail party. Because every parent knows that as soon as baby's asleep, I'm getting drunk next door. It's like, who thinks of this stuff, right? Or how about the one where the sandwich shop starts your order as you approach? Because I just happened to be going to the corner store, it's like, later. It's so clear that technologists think in terms of these trigger condition rules that it's like mail rules for like filtering your mail. If you just have enough rules, it's going to be cool. It's like the idea of false positive doesn't really enter into their thinking. And false positives, I was on the Newton project, okay, with bad handwriting recognition. I have scars all over my body from what false positives will do to you and the perception of what it'll work. So you've got to get this stuff right. The other one, of course, and this is the dead giveaway, Smartphone warns you of ex-girlfriend ahead. Aside from the crazy privacy implications of that, it so clearly marked this article as being written by a 25-year-old pimply technology nerd, male technology nerd. And it was just like, guys, this is the kind of stuff that doesn't help. This is a bad kind of default thinking, because in general, this is our model of the world. Our model is a person and a device. And this is how we've been thinking the last 40 years. Now, the devices have changed over time. We went from kind of a mouse to a trackpad, and that kind of changed things a little bit. And then went from a trackpad to a touch screen, and now we're all obsessed about the details of this interaction. It's so easy to kind of get carried away by the incremental details of interaction to miss the obvious pattern that we've basically had devices that have apps that we buy and install for 40 years. This has been the same pattern for a very, very long time. Now, of course, along came the internet and the cloud, and initially it was this thing that we kind of used through our devices, but eventually it became kind of a much more important thing and kind of started to become its own thing of itself. There's like the relationship that I have with my device, there's a relationship I have with the cloud services, and there's a relationship that now that we have smart devices, how they interact with the cloud. And this forms a little bit more interesting model that we have been using for the last 40 years. But at the same time, this has continued to evolve and get more interesting. So let's take a look at, for example, what happens with the cloud. Initially, we were so excited to have Gmail because it allowed my work computer, desktop computer, to have the same email as my home desktop computer, and that was kind of what the cloud gave us back then. But as we had more devices and we were more mobile, then something like Dropbox came up and made it a little bit more nuanced, and we could use it in more interesting ways. We're evolving what the cloud means to us. And then finally, we had these issues that are more social, like Instagram. We're sharing things. So what the cloud is itself a moving target, which I find fascinating to think about, and is constantly changing. Now, of course, on the personal side, there's not just me anymore, but these huge clouds of people. And that evolved, because initially, every time I had a service, I had to invite friends. And that got tired. And then this delightful monopoly came along that made our life awesome, because I didn't have to worry about that anymore. But then we had to just handed the keys of the kingdom to Facebook, because we traded off one problem for another, but there's a certain value in having everything done in one place. So we have this uneasy kind of alliance. And then, of course, there's the device side of things, where each one of these devices is doing their own thing, and each one has their own cloud that they're talking to. It's getting complicated. And we could talk forever about all the nuances of all this. I don't want to go too deep in this, but my point is to say, this is really cool, and so much is happening, but we think about it like this. This is our default thinking. All of that magic is hidden behind this, like, we're just touching screens. And that's how we think of everything. So let's try to break this apart a little bit. Treat this triangle as our map of default thinking. How are we going to just break outside our boundaries a little bit? So I'm going to take each corner in turn. Let's start with talking about devices. The biggest problem I have when I talk to people about smart devices is that they keep thinking that a smart device has to be as smart or smarter than we currently have. I have to have a toaster with a screen on it, and I have to be able to talk to it. It has to have apps, and it has to all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, guys, wait a sec. We're talking about something totally different here. In fact, someone tweeted, I don't think my toaster needs apps. Har, 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 har. It's like, guys, you don't get it. That's, again, your old paradigm. We need to realize that smart devices can be barely smart. And so I wrote a blog post about this a couple of months ago where I broke down what a smart device was in 3 rough categories, because there's only one default way people are thinking about it. Let's just take the simple one, which is just simply discovery. If all of my devices just were broadcasting a URL to them, that's all they did, just broadcast a URL, and I could walk into a room and see those devices, I could go to that website. That sounds incredibly trivial, and if all I had to do was simply, if my toaster was a Black & Decker toaster, I'm sorry, is Black & Decker known in Australia? Okay, good. If it's a Black & Decker toaster, that's kind of boring. It's like a marketing thing. But imagine if it had a ampersand param and gave me my model number. So now actually when I connected to it, I could actually get support, crowdsource information, videos, learn how to use it a little bit more. It gets a little bit more interesting. And then if I actually included in addition to it, like the serial number, now every device could be that device, and when I bought it, and where it was made, and my service support calls, and I could just get more interesting stuff. Device manufacturers would kill for this, and it's just a URL. Right? And you know this is important because buy any device today, and what do you see all over it? QR codes. They are desperate for you to use this stuff. By the way, you know what QR codes are called, right? The nickname, the robot barf. It kind of works, you know. But anyway, this idea that these device manufacturers are desperate to get you to use to go to their website, and yet the minute you unpack it, you lose that. If your devices could have this, it would be a lot more interesting. Now this is, like I said before, really trivial stuff, but we have to realize how valuable little simple things is. Now let's go the next level up, control. Now, you just would need the tiniest of electronics to have a device broadcast a URL. That would be like $1. If you're willing to go $5, you could actually have control circuitry, so you can actually control that toaster. Now again, I'm not going to play World of Warcraft on my toaster, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the LEDs to be the color to match the highlights in my kitchen. I'm going to change the toasted done sound to SpongeBob SquarePants for my niece, right? I'm going to just do trivial things with that toaster because it's a trivial cost. And we have to start thinking tiny, not big. And now, if it costs me an extra $150 for that, no one's going to pay for that. But that's the whole point. In the next couple of years, it's going to cost a couple of bucks. And so it's the people that think small are going to be doing more interesting devices. Now, the final one, the bigger one on top, is coordination. And coordination is the one that really, I think, is where everyone gets excited. It's the one where we're trying to make things happen. It's the idea that when I get up in the morning, the curtains will open and the blinds will clear and the coffee will get made and the lawnmowers will get started and the sprinklers will go and the coffee will percolate. And it's like, okay, cool, awesome. We all want to live in the Jetsons. I get that, okay? But that's going to be a little bit of work. I mean, I'm having a hard time getting my DVD player to talk to my television through an HDMI cable right now, okay? How can we expect all these devices from different manufacturers to work together? It's going to take a little while. Now, I'm not against this vision. I'm just saying let's just kind of crawl before we walk a little bit. So what I'm suggesting is this kind of 2x2 matrix. This actually was my last blog post, where I just said, we're just thinking about this stuff as simple, simple devices. We need to kind of break it up a little bit more. So, for example, let's have, this is, by the way, consultants love to create 2x2 matrices, right? They're just a way of breaking things up and talking about it. So we've got the device on the horizontal, one device. Then we have swarms on the top, so multiple devices. And on the vertical side, what we've got is a direct interaction style, and on the right-hand side, we've got a background, interaction style. So let me just give you some examples. So, for example, the direct device. This is like everything we've ever known in our entire life, right? This is the classic set of devices, just computers in general, just overall devices that basically you interact with. It's a single thing that you talk to. But where would they say like the Nest fit in, right? The Nest is a device that's got a screen on it. You interact with it, and even its smartphone app looks just like it, right? In fact, Michael Kuniewski pointed this out. I thought it was really a good point, that probably the smart device revolution was kick-started by the telephone, smartphone, because it allowed you to take basically a very complicated UI and bring it over to your phone virtually, saving you tons of cost. So these devices can be made quite cheaply, and that's kind of cool, but it effectively is a smart device. I mean, basically it's a direct device and fits right here. So again, nothing wrong with direct devices, we just need to know that that's what we've been doing, and it's why when you start seeing these new devices, you see the the iGrill. Has anyone seen the iGrill? It's a thing that monitors your grill temperature and alerts your phone. 2 weeks ago, they came up with the iKettle. And we're going to see all sorts of eye stuff, which is basically just falling in this category. Nothing wrong with it, just the same old, same old. So let's talk about direct swarm. We're starting to see more interesting things there. And the example of direct swarm would be, say, smart light bulbs. You walk in, you push a button, and your house lights up. One interaction, multiple devices. Kind of cool. The next thing is going to be, like I say, a smart parking lot. We've probably all seen these. When you pull into a parking lot, you see a sign, and it goes, level 1, full, level 2, full, level 3, 17 spaces. So you go to level 3, right? This is more the industrial internet. Have you guys ever heard of M to M? M to M is kind of like the serious big boys playing with the Internet of Things devices. Same basic idea, but more sensor-based. We're beginning to program in hardware so that we can take these devices and kind of make applications out of it. So in that case, you're just building a parking app out of these sensors. The more interesting one actually was by iBeacon, which is a nice little wrapper on Bluetooth 4 technology. Now, while I hate Bluetooth 3, with the heat of 1,000 suns, I hate Bluetooth 3. Bluetooth 4 is kind of cool. It's kind of okay. And it's got this lovely idea of an advertising packet. So you can take this little puck with a little battery in it, and it can last for a year, and every couple of seconds it just sends a little bit of information out. And so even Apple kind of has this example in their little documentation where you take this little puck and you put it underneath every table in a restaurant. So then when you use the application, and they of course love applications, that's a separate conversation, but when you use the application, you can order food, and it just knows what table you're at, and the food just comes to you directly. Right? So you're directly interacting with this app, but the swarm kind of gives input. So again, just making us think outside the box as to the kinds of applications we can have. Now let's take a look at a background device. This is something, anybody know the Lockatron? I'm sure so many people have seen the Lockatron. It's a little thing, cool, not as many as I'd hoped, but basically it's a little device that fits over your door lock. And the original version was like Nest, where you had to you walked up to the door, pulled out your phone, unlocked your phone, opened the app, hit the unlock button, it goes zzz, and by that time you'd forgot why you were home. But it's just like, there's a lot of steps, but it's kind of cool. And it was cool because you could give codes to friends, they could come in. So there was some value to it. But they realized it was too hard. So the new version uses Bluetooth 4, not a surprise. And so as you walk up, it senses your approach, automatically unlocks, and then when you walk away, it relocks again. So it's pretty cool. So it's now, once you get it set up, it's a background device. And you don't ever have to touch it. You don't have to deal with it. It's kind of a new pattern. What's interesting, though, is that the Nest actually straddles these two worlds. It starts off as a direct device that you have to configure and control and set up and all that kind of stuff. But once you do it, it automatically starts to learn. It starts doing things. So over time, it becomes a background device. And what I like about this is that we now have a vocabulary to talk about how devices move in between these modalities. Things can be a little bit more subtle. I like vocabulary that allows us to talk at a different level. Now the background swarm. Not surprisingly, this is the one that's a little bit more complicated. It's where all these devices work together and do interesting things. So the complicated things, the house controlling the coffee maker is a bit silly, but there are other more subtle ones that are coming along. The good example here would be the smart light bulb again. As we get more sensors, the direct control of the light bulb will turn into much more of a background one. So people are already talking about the fact that I have smart light bulbs that I can directly control, but if I get up in the middle of the night, it could actually do like soft 10% lighting, and as I walk through the rooms, they could light up so I can do things. So it's turning into a background swarm, which I find interesting. So what you get with this kind of matrix is just a new vocabulary, a way of saying we're not just going to make smart toasters or smart refrigerators or iGrills or iWatches. There's a whole category of things. My guess is that we will tend to start here conceptually, and as we start, we'll go two directions. Devices will either become more background-based, or we'll be having things that are more swarm-based. And that's where that's the obvious directions for us to go. We will eventually be flirting with background swarms, but again, my comment before about false positives is that I think that the more you're doing background swarm-type behavior, if you're changing the temperature from, say, 22 to 21, that's one thing. If I'm buying something, that's something totally different. And I think what we're going to probably see is background swarms that try to do the minimal thing for you and then maybe offer the ability to do something. So there's going to be an interesting way of dealing with background swarms and the UX of how we make that happen. I think that's a fascinating area to talk about. So here, exercise for the user. Where does Chromecast fit in? Now, at first you're like, well, I'm not sure it really fits in anywhere. But the idea about a Chromecast is fascinating because it now deconstructs the screen entirely. So the obvious place to first put is a direct device. I'm talking to my tablet's not talking to the TV, and I'm doing it through the Chromecast. So that's reasonable. But that's exactly why I have this grid, because that's the default way of us thinking about it as a directed device. What if we think about it as a swarm device? What happens if all my screens had Chromecast capability? Then I could start to have on-demand interaction. I could actually have a website that works on 2 or 3 screens simultaneously. Or if I walk past a screen, I can actually use it as I need it and keep walking. I mean, it's a really fascinating idea, and I wrote an article for the W3C last month about the idea that we're not experimenting with what it's like to deconstruct the screen from the device. The fact that a website right now has trouble forming on multiple different screen sizes is just the first step. Imagine if you have a website that's capable of being used on 2 or 3 screens simultaneously. Kind of makes you think a little bit. But it's like, I think this is a fascinating area that we need to then think about how to use that, and I want to have more standards to play with that. So that's the device category. Let's now move over to the person side of the triangle and what that means. Because what's happening right now is we've kind of assumed this weird dichotomy in our life. That it's like, well, when we're dealing with the web, of course on the cloud, we're going to deal with the web. And that's just how it works. But when we're dealing with smart devices, oh, no. We've got to have native apps. Now, it's kind of understandable that we would do that, because when mobile phones came out, they were doing things the web couldn't handle. And the web, bless its cotton socks, is a bit slow, right? And it tries. And it just gets to these weird standards bodies. It just takes forever. So it's understandable that you would do native apps for these devices. But if you believe in Moore's law in any way, shape, or form, you're going to have 1 of these smart devices this year, and then 2 next year, and then 5 the following years, and then like 1,000. I mean, we're just going to get more and more of these devices. And are we really going to be installing an app for every single one of them? It's really this exponential curve, because right now it seems okay, but where are we going with this? So imagine, again, the other issue is that we are so enthralled with the smart devices like the Nest. But then we're getting smaller and smaller devices, the Nike Fuel Band, the Vitale Glow Cap, smart parking meters, and eventually with RFID tags, everything in a museum can be tagged. And in fact, what's even getting more interesting is that when you throw in the data layer on top, even something as dumb as a bus stop can start to be a smart device. It has nothing in it other than a geolocation. But with 1 click of an upload, you can then take every single bus stop in a city and make it smart, just if you can look it up via its geolocation. And what's happening with these devices is what I call just-in-time interaction. More and more of these devices aren't going to be things that I own in my house, but they're going to be things that I can interact with in the wild. I'm going to walk up and use them and then lose them. The idea of installing an app to talk to a parking meter in a city I'm visiting is ridiculous. It's just not going to do that. So how do we kind of get to that point? So John alluded to why mobile apps must die. I wrote that about 2 years ago, and it got a lot of traction. But the reason I wrote it was not because I thought that, web rules and native drools. That wasn't kind of the idea that I wanted to have a fight between them. It was just that I was just tired of native being the only tool in the toolkit. It's like all of our clients at Frog had to have an app, and there were so many reasons why you wouldn't want to do that. I just wanted to have another alternative. And so what's going to happen is, as we get more and more apps, it's just going to become overwhelming. And we did a study at Frog where a client wanted an app, and they would put a sign up in the store that said, "We're in the App Store." And the vast majority of clients couldn't care less. I can't be bothered. When you see a study and you find clients going, "I can't be bothered," that's design gold. And yet this happens over and over with us. And we all know it. We've all done this. So this, to me, is like a cardinal, basic rule of UX design. It's the fundamental principle I call value greater than pain. And the example of this was when SMS first came out in the 90s. Those of you who are old enough to remember that, we're a vanishing breed. But the idea is that SMS was horrible. I mean, it was really a terrible UI, but teenagers loved it because it saved them so much money. So in this particular case, value was greater than pain. So the product was a success. You very rarely get value this high, but it is a success. The flip side of this was Google, about the same time, reduced the page weight of Google significantly so that it loaded a little bit faster, 0.4 of a second. I mean, barely faster. The value was exactly the same. The pain was slightly lowered, and usage went up significantly, many, many percentage points. It was really fascinating. So in that particular case, pain was reduced. Value was identical. The product still got better. So what's fascinating to me is this relationship between value and pain. Because when you go to a conference, especially like a marketing conference, all anybody can talk about is value. It's just like features and things they're trying to do. As a designer, my life is pain. okay? That's what I do. I'm a pain reducer, right? That's what if I'm doing my job, that's what I'm doing. And yet, people don't really appreciate this kind of dichotomy that you can do more than, that it's a combination of the two in their relationship. What I find fascinating, though, is if pain goes down low enough, value can go down too. And that's the interesting thing, because it's why I wrote this blog post called Triumph of the Mundane, because normally people think the world is going to be lit up by these massive things, but it's the little stuff that becomes painless that becomes really transformative. Just take a look at google.com. Before you had it on your mobile phone, you could only do it on a desktop, so you only did it for important searches, like I'm going to go on a flight, or I'm going to go on a vacation, or I'm going to do that. Once you have Google in your pocket, you do pub quizzes, and you just have arguments with your friends, and you kind of go, who's in that movie? It's like you start using it for trivial reasons. So we already are seeing that happen. So I find it really fascinating that when we talk about this, we don't realize this kind of difference, because it's that tension that causes us to change things. So for example, Yahoo. Yahoo is a good example of us reliving our history and not really appreciating it. Yahoo, back in the 90s, actually was a hierarchical list. It was not a search engine. And the whole web was a hierarchical list of links. And it got to be kind of a bit crazy. It was a little bit like apps today. It got more and more and more, and the user was responsible for navigating. Google came along and said, screw that. We're just going to basically just give you a search box. But it wasn't just simply a search box to a bunch of links. It was actually a search box that was ranked, so you could find the right things. And it kind of changed the game. And I feel like as we get more and more devices, the pain gets higher. We're going to need something to kind of flip this problem around. So this quote kind of makes sense to me. Insanity is doing exactly the same thing and expecting a different result. If we're going to just keep using apps for the rest of our life, eventually something's going to have to break. The miracle of the web, I find, is that what happens inside the DOM is amazing. We have the most amazing rendering engine on the planet. It can do so much stuff. And what have we done? We have strapped a goddamn command line UI on top of it. We have to type C prompt commands to go places. What is up with that? That is the most backwards thing I can imagine. Phones have sensors. People are excited by the fact that sensors can do. And has the browser really changed? No, we're not taking advantage of the sensors. It seems kind of obvious that the browser should be doing what every other mobile app on the planet is doing. The superpower of the web is that it's interaction on demand. With a click, I'm using an app. I'm using a website. How can we kind of harness that? Because if we're going to do smart computing, smart commuting, or smart appliances, or smart spaces of any kind, we need to be able to have interaction with a click. I mean, how many people have, in the last 6 months, deleted a bunch of old apps from your phone? Trick question, right? We all do it. We are gardening our phones, right? We are maintaining this. It's a kind of a weird thing that we're responsible for maintaining the functional capabilities of our device. It's totally backwards. So what we should probably be doing is using the sensors to then have a little service that looks around the phone and finds things of interest, takes them, brings them together, ranks them, and then gives us the top 4 so that I can just kind of pull down and interact with it. So in a way, I'm talking about the next Google, but instead of Googling the world, I'm Googling my room. I think that'll be a little bit more interesting. So let me just give you an example. I'm using the phone, a sketchy phone example, grayscale, to kind of obscure whatever it is. And it could apply, by the way, to Google Glass or a smart TV or even a Surface display. It doesn't really matter. The overall idea is that I don't want my phone beeping my pocket, number one. If I take my phone out and I pull down the notification manager, right now I see things like SMS and emails and whatever. But what would happen if I pulled it down in the morning? I get up, I pull down, and I can see things like my car in the driveway. I can see my wife as her phone, and I can see like my stereo. So, and I click on each one of them, it just takes me to their web page. I kind of don't care. It's just simply a much better command line. It's a much better URL bar that just takes me to these apps. And again, these apps aren't super complicated. It's just simply like, do you want to start your car? Do you want to turn off the stereo? This is something that HTML5 can handle easily today. So what I'm talking about is a little grandiose, I will admit. What we're talking about is having effectively a series of devices that are broadcasting their URL and a series of other smart displays listening for it. I'm calling this the just-in-time ecosystem, about a new way for the devices to kind of create a whole new type of internet of physical devices, where every physical device, technically speaking, is a website. So Let me now move on to my last topic, which is to say, we've now talked about how people look at the things. How about how the cloud is looking at things? And the frustration I have there, as I pointed out before, is that we have all these devices, and each one right now is talking to their own cloud and their own little APIs, and it's all getting kind of locked up in these individual things. So my penultimate blog post was called "The Stormy Sky of Cranky Clouds," because I like alliteration. But the idea is that the cloud is a complete myth. There is no cloud. There are clouds, and they don't like each other. And they're completely like walled off. We should stop saying the cloud because it's overly optimistic. It doesn't exist. And so what you really want is you want to have all these devices basically kind of like work together. And so instead of having them all go together, we go into one cloud. There was just 2 weeks ago, there was a quantified self movement, a conference in San Francisco. And these people were livid because these are the higher end kind of early adopters, and they were having 3 or 4 devices on their body measuring stuff, and every one went to a separate cloud. And if there was one data set that you want to have together, it's going to be effectively your health data, right? But every company says, well, it's my proprietary edge. This is how I lock in the user. Ever notice how companies use slave terminology to describe their users? To lock in a user? It's kind of weird. So this idea that these companies are breaking it up is kind of getting it all wrong, because what seems interesting to me is how each one of these devices is producing a piece of the puzzle, a little tiny bit. My strong feeling is that there's going to be no one killer device. The killer app is going to be the meta app that talks and looks at all that data and comes up with interesting inferences. Oh, look at, over the last 6 months, your heart rate has been slowly rising, or your blood pressure is going up, or your glucose is going down, or your house looks like it's slowly having a leak because you're using more and more energy, or there's a security issue. The killer app is going to be reasoning over combined data. And we're not even close to talking about that, because all we can talk about is this particular app and this particular app and this particular app. The big data applies to all of the data, not just one little slice of it. Now, so what we probably need is an API so that all these devices can then register with a storage service. No, there's some security issues. I'm kind of simplifying a little bit here. But then have all that data go in one place in the right kind of format. There are, fortunately, companies that are thinking about this. This is just not some random thing. These companies are trying to have open servers, and I like Spark, for example, because they really don't care where you store your data. You can just take their API and store it somewhere else. They're clearly in the hardware business, not in the storage business. So companies are playing around this idea. It's kind of like an indie web movement, but it's starting. In fact, there's a whole website called personalcloud.com that's actually talking about this and making it, working it out. I find it a fledgling thing, but it seems to be the only way for us to really get the power of these devices is to talk about bringing them together. So, let me just ask one more thing, which is to say, each of these corners provides a way for us to break out of default thinking, whether we have the little 2x2 matrix to think about different types of devices, whether we talk about the discovery service, so all smart devices should be accessible through the web, or we be able to store our data all in the cloud, in one cloud. All of these are different ways for us to think about this problem. And my suggestions, my ideas, could be wrong. But it's about saying what direction do we need to go and what variations can we have to get this. But I get this reaction all the time. Scott, you are a hopeless dreamer. This is never going to happen. Businesses have too much control, there's too much value, and so forth. And I get that. The problem is that if we don't know what we want, that's what we're going to get. We have to have a North Star. We have to realize that where this is going to break down, what do we want to have happen? So let me just give you a couple of examples of where we're going to go, or examples that might let us know how this could work. So for example, we forget that the delta between Netscape and Gmail was 10 years. It takes time to build a platform. Right now, we're so excited by Instagram selling for $1.5 billion after 6 months that we think that if something isn't amazing and complete in a short period of time, it must be a bad idea. We forget how crap the web was back in the 90s, yet we still used it. Right? So let's realize that it'll take a little while. We have a simple discovery service, have a simple data storage model, and work our way up. As long as we're willing to think a little bit longer term, we'll grow it. The other one is that, does anybody remember all 4 of these companies? You have to be kind of old to remember all 4 of them. These companies were the web back in the 90s. Literally, people would like not browse the web because these were these custom little portals that were better. People forget that proprietary technology almost always is better than open technology at first because they can control everything, they can lock it down. But eventually, the open web just roared past AOL and just wiped them out. But it is kind of this trade-off over time. It's always going to be the case that companies like Apple and Facebook are going to give you these velvet-covered shackles that make you want to become part of tied into their system because they are better to a certain point. But over time, it will change. The other issue I have is about this idea that, let's take FedEx. FedEx is a lovely company that is built and it's successful because it can use public infrastructure. It uses free municipal roads. There's this basic idea, I think the whole world can be divided up into truck ideas and road ideas. Truck ideas are basically individual companies. Road ideas are about infrastructure. The problem is that almost every company out there thinks in terms of a truck idea. The whole idea that they want to have their product and they build their own toll roads and they sue people for using their toll roads. And it becomes this very lock-in type of system. And it's understandable to a certain extent, but it seems like such an enormous waste of time. Does anybody know Malcolm McLean? Malcolm McLean is my hero. He was the Steve Jobs of shipping in the 1950s. He basically invented containerized shipping. This is what the container that goes from a truck, onto a train and onto a boat. When he did this, he got rid of longshoremen, and it was 26 times cheaper to use his service. He made a killing. But what did this bastion of capitalism do? He gave it all away. He actually gave it to the ISO standard, and he was made Maritime Man of the Century because he kind of single-handedly created containerized shipping for the whole world. He realized he had a road idea, and by giving it away, he made it so much bigger, and he made even more money. He made a mint. And it's ironic that we have to look back to the 50s to find somebody to inspire us to remember our roots of the web and to realize that a rising tide floats all boats. Because what would you rather have? 75% of that little red pie? Or 25% of a gigantic pie. And that's the idea about open standards and making everybody make more money. So, when thinking about the future, it's so easy to be blinded by kind of the giants of the day. And I'll admit that an awful lot of my ideas are grandiose and probably not really practical right away. But that's the whole point of a paradigm shift. When a paradigm shift happens, all the good ideas seem a little crazy. And it is going to be a little bit of a revolution to kind of figure this all out. But as we find these new devices and we see what's happening, we're going to see the AOL of Internet of Things. We're going to see companies that are going to do proprietary lock-in, and that's understandable, it's expected. But it's got to break down over time. One company can't own everything. So we have to be on the lookout and understand what we need to do. Because eventually, like I said before, if we don't know what we want, that's what we're going to get. Everybody in this audience can be participating in this revolution. Whether you're a developer making a new open product, whether you are going to support those developers through Kickstarter or Indiegogo, or whether or not you just simply want to talk about it here at the conference. Memes like this take discussion. They take the ability for us to kind of talk about them and make them more important. The tools for us to build this are just lying at our feet. We can kind of make them ourselves right now. We just have to make it and work on it together. So thank you very much for listening. Power to the people.